thank you for this opportunity, for allowing and giving us this opportunity to talk to you on this August forum, where we can share some ideas with you and of course get some feedback on what your view is about the current security trends, what is happening across the BFSI segment, so to speak, and what we'd like to do today is share what we are trying to do and how we would take you to the future. We had a lot of question and answer or feedback coming from the people sitting here. Of course, Vishal and Sarang's session and Vaibhav's session right now raised some interesting topics, and the underlying theme of all the questions and feedback that was coming is how do we collaborate, number one. How do we go from, say, a reactive state that we are in today, where we are looking at addressing the problems which are already happening rather than going to prevent them and be proactive about security. And of course, how do we make sure that security does not compromise the business continuity and the business keeps on going as usual rather than hinder it with having too much security, so to speak. As my topic says, that how do we take the security from reactive to proactive? So there are certain things that I like to talk about before I get to it. First and foremost, some things across the globe that were shared by the IBM session before, that things are happening in 2015 that have happened globally. There are certain things, especially from a BFSI perspective, that have happened in recent times. I don't know how many of you read, but it was in the newspaper a couple of days back when the website of the Defense Department, the finance controller of the Defense Department's website was hacked and defaced. I don't want to tell you what exactly was put on the website. You guys will probably know that. But the important bit is a lot of information of our armed forces officers, including their PII information like their PAN card, their account numbers, the actual salaries that they were getting, PF, all of this was taken. Now, I don't think that the Defense Department's website is not protected, right? It's defense is, well, as the word suggests, it is the defense of our country. Obviously, they would have security measures in place, still they were compromised. So it's not that, like the previous session, that the attacks that are coming in are only targeted towards the European and the American markets. We are the target of attacks because we are one of the biggest and the fastest growing economies in the world. That is where they are finding opportunities. So going ahead, what I'd like to talk about a little bit is the state of security. I'd not spend too much time on it, but just give you an overview of what is happening. This is something that you probably know in most cases, but I'd like to touch on some of the things. What are the security trends that are going through, especially in the BFSI segment? What is the impact of these trends? Of course, there's one thing that I'd like to talk about, which is the cyber kill chain, which is what any organization today looks to either address or protect or anticipate. And last but not the least is how do we look at adaptive threat prevention, okay, where we can make it proactive. That will be the underlying theme of my presentation. So first and foremost, if we look at the state of security, the attackers have become organized, and by organized I mean not just having a lot of financial backing or a lot of infrastructure, but they have become organized to the extent that they have become state-sponsored actors. Who doesn't know about the Sony Pictures hack? Everyone knows about it, right? I mean, I probably wouldn't be interested in what the James Bond movie's budget was and why it was slashed, but yes, that information is out in the public. A lot of movies were released onto the internet, which basically translates to to financial damage to Sony Pictures. Now, though this is not relevant to the BFSI infrastructure, but the point that I'm trying to make here is that an organized attacker can bring down a huge corporate, which is as protected, so to speak, as any BFSI segment player, and still bring them down to their knees. The other bit is the increasing volume. Now, we did talk about or touch a bit about how the SOC should behave, what should be there, what shouldn't be there. But SOC today has become a place where there's a huge amount of noise created by the events. How do we make sense out of that? How do we make sense out of 3 million alerts that probably your tier 1 analyst is looking at every day. Okay, how do we filter out the noise, white noise, and look at what is relevant? Okay, the last bit is the sophisticated nature of the attack. How do we get past someone if they could put in a screen in a live banking transaction in real time? How do we take care of the fraud that is happening from inside out? So that's what we need to look at, and to address that we need to see where we can fix the broken remediation, where we can look at preventing the attackers beforehand, and how do we increase the limited security expertise that is in-house, how we can enrich that security expertise, right? So this is something that we are also looking at, wherein the network perimeter of organizations has become ephemeral. Okay, we no longer know where our network ends or your network ends, and it goes on to the cloud. Okay, a lot of hosting is now done in cloud data centers, in the Amazons, the rack spaces of this world, the Microsoft Azures of this world. Okay, how do we address that reality? How do we make sure that our protection extends there as well? And by protection, I mean first and foremost having the visibility to actually look into what is happening in our infrastructure there. So we need to be able to be prepared for that. Last, from a trend perspective, is that I'd like to talk is the commoditization of threats. Okay, we've thrown the term advanced persistent threats or advanced malware or zero-day for some time now, and it's something that is a reality today. We are facing this every day. What does it actually mean? Because in just the previous session we heard that most people are today targeting the endpoints of your users, of people who are sitting inside your environment. So if someone says to me, and considering I'm coming from an AV vendor, if someone says to me that AV is dead or AV has now become a commodity, I would have to disagree with that person. For the simple reason, while our perimeter is still as strong as it is, but my devices which are protected or my endpoints are not staying in their place. They're moving inside, outside, and we need to make sure that my protection extends there. So I'll be talking a little bit about that. Now, as you can see from the stats, at 21%, BFSI is the second most targeted industry. I don't need to harp on that. We know this, it's a reality. And malicious code or malware is still the number one problem. I mean, yes, there are people who are trying to do intrusions, who are trying to do DDoS on your infrastructure, yes, and they are able to do that. And we have protections, we can protect to a great extent that. But yes, malware and malicious code being dropped in your environment is still the number one problem that we need to fix. And that cannot just be fixed by having controls at the perimeter, right? Now, this is the industry risk posture from the Verizon report of last year. And as you can see that while yes, there are threats that are coming in from partner segment, etc., there's also something that we need to look at of payload getting dropped from outside to inside. And again here, as we see, manufacturing followed by banking are the primary industries that are being targeted. Moving on, okay. This is all I'll talk about security trends and what is happening today. This is something that you know. What I'd like to talk about is the cyber kill chain. Now this is the basis of all attacks that are happening, and this is the basis of all controls that you have exercised or will be exercising or should be exercising in your environment. So what does cyber kill chain mean? Okay, the first step in that cyber kill chain is reconnaissance. Today's sophisticated attacker is going to be extremely well educated about your network. He'd probably know which vendor firewalls that you're using, what IPSs you're using, what endpoint security you have, what applications you're running, and what servers they're running on. That is the reconnaissance that they do before they even start working on your environment. They can create, and we know for sure that they can create custom malware. Okay, how many of you have heard about this botnet called Dbone botnet? Anyone? It's probably one of the rarely publicized botnets, but it's affected 5 million endpoints till date. And those 5 million endpoints, that Dbone botnet was brought down by American and European federal agencies. What it does is it basically writes, it's a polymorphic malware. So it has 5 million unique samples. Okay, no AV can catch up to that. Having just said before that if I have an endpoint that can take care of everything, yeah, I wish it could, but AV alone cannot take care of that. So we need to make sure that how do we look at future-proofing that. Okay, so for polymorphic malware, for advanced malwares that are out there, how do we make sure that we are aware of what is happening? So we'll talk about that in just a little bit. So this is the cyber kill chain, and this is what, if we map standards to it, we need to be able to anticipate all stages of the kill chain. We need to prevent the delivery and exploit either by protecting my endpoint or the perimeter. We need to detect when the exploit gets deployed or actually exploited, and respond. Incident response is of course the most important part. So how do we make ourselves proactive? Okay, I'll just skip this. So for the lack of time, I don't want to spend too much time on the Sony hack because we've already talked about it. But how do we make our security more proactive? What is missing? Okay, the missing is that if the attacks are targeted, security should also be able to prevent targeted attacks. The way to go about it is that we come out of the siloed environment. That is what everyone was talking about, right? How do we increase collaboration? What if we could have a firewall and an IPS talk to each other? And I'm not saying a single vendor IPS firewall, okay? I'm saying varied vendors talking to each other about information so that they can share that information and help you become more proactive. And I'm not talking about the heavy API-based or database pull-based integration. What should we be looking at is a lightweight way to subscribe and publish information across all these security devices, and that is what we are talking about when it comes to adaptive threat prevention. Okay, we need to have this intelligence which is shared instantaneously, so to speak, so that you know that when an attack is happening, that is when you need the remediation and the prevention bit. Okay, so that is what adaptive security or threat prevention would look like, where your security devices actually form a grid and there's no gaps, so to speak, to slip into for a malware. Okay, how does it look like? Okay, what does it look like? So if the disjointed API-based integrations are what we talk about when we say threat intelligence or collaboration, so to speak, we need to move away from that. We need to move to a model which is a fabric or communication fabric based model. Something like what IBM themselves have created for the Internet of Things. It's called MQTT. Okay, it's a lightweight protocol to share information very quickly. Now it's a generic protocol, it's not proprietary, so to speak, and allows this publish subscription model of information. It could be things like file hashes, it could be things like IP and URLs, but if that information is shared across your endpoint, your network devices, your security devices, that is where your collaborative intelligence would come into picture. What if you could do something like this, where you can have a bidirectional layer to share this information? Okay, which would make sure that there is a repository, local, which has intelligence coming from not just the global vendors like us, or a Symantec, or a Trend Micro, or a Cisco, or a FireEye, so to speak, but also have something which is relevant to you. You yourself can add intelligence there, because it is more relevant to your organization. What if you have your revoked certificates available to the security devices to take the decision that I don't want any traffic coming using these revoked certificates? What if you could do that? And last but not the least, have this information as remedial information at the endpoint. That is where the remediation can be, broken remediation can be fixed. That's what adaptive threat intelligence or threat protection prevention would look like. Okay, it's something like this. This is what this power of knowledge or application of this knowledge would look like, and this would be instantaneous. You would have third-party feeds like a virus total, right? You know about what virus total is, right? It's a repository of probably all the AV vendors. Okay, so you can cross-check whether if one vendor failed, can you use the other vendor's information available on virus total? Or you can have your own custom feeds, like we talked about, like Vishal just covered, that there are already forums here which are sharing information. What if you could take feeds from that and apply it to your network? You don't have to do anything apart from getting that feed, and it will be shared immediately across all your endpoints. we already have things like Visa who publish signatures which can be used relevant specifically for banking environment and have that updated instantaneously in your environment. So that's what knowledge would look like. Last bit. So what would adaptive threat prevention look like? It should be smart, it should be fast to take action instantaneously, and it should be aware of whatever is happening across, be it your own vertical, be it across the globe, but it should be able to be aware and share that information across everything. So with that, I'm sorry I may have overstepped my time a little bit, but thank you. I'm here. You can have questions either right now or through the session where I can address some of the questions that sort of I have raised, and thank you for listening to me.